This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska. Welcome back to our podcast. Tommy, what do we got?
Well, today we're going to be looking at something that, again, I think we knew a little bit about, but I didn't know as much about it until we started researching it. It's like an event that people probably heard of, but may not know the detail of. We're going to look at the conflict or the Falkland Islands War, the Falkland Islands conflict, because it was a short, undeclared war between Argentina and Britain, which basically was over the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands, the South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, and it lasted for 74 days and cost over 900 lives.
Yeah, about 10 weeks total. Fairly brief war. And as you and I talked about before we clicked the record button, we are going to discuss the implications, the political implications of this war, because it becomes very obvious when we start to research this conflict that it's not as much about the military aspect, which is still very important, but also about the impetus behind the conflict from both sides, the Argentinians as well as the British, and just kind of what the war and the conflict meant for some political futures of certain individuals. And also, militarily wise, the Falkland conflict remains one of the largest air naval combat operations, right, between modern forces since the end of the Second World War. It is studied intensely through different military analysis, as well as different historians since then, since it happened, because it is, pretty much a model of what modern air naval combat operation would look like. I mean, and again, by modern, modern-ish.
Absolutely.
But
it was in the 80s.
It was 82. Yeah, you were. Wait, were you born?
I think I was 2 days old when it ended.
Yeah, I wasn't alive yet. All right, so let's get into talking about this a little bit and kind of, see what, why, and all that other good stuff.
Yeah, well, okay. I guess to start talking about, you have to kind of look at like the background a little bit, right? So Argentina has wanted this island for a long time. It goes back from years. But basically what was going on here is that the British have had this island since the 1700s, actually the 1600s. They've had control over the Falkland Islands. It's a very small population there. So that's what people have to understand too. There's only about, 1,800 people there at the time. The descendants of like the early settlers
Brits.
On this island.
Yeah,
they are British. And what basically happened is they were always voting whether or not to become part of Argentina, because Argentina wanted it, or to become part of, or to remain British subjects.
Sorry, we should mention real quick here that the actual Falkland Islands lie only 300 miles east of Argentina.
Yeah.
So they're
right there, yeah.
They're literally next to Argentina, not anywhere near Britain. So that should be kind of established. Yep.
Yeah, they're 8,000 miles away from Britain. So that causes a big problem for this war, too. It's the reason why it took 10 weeks, because a lot of that time is just transport time. And the British have had that island dating back since 1690, like I said. But the Argentinians actually did put up a fort on one of the other islands. And it was there for a while, and the British kind of just let them do it. They're like, whatever, because again, they never really invested much money. They didn't even care about the Falkland Islands all that much until 82. To give a little backtrack, is basically both countries, Argentina and Britain, are not in the best of circumstances, let's say, in 1982. Great Britain, for example, they have the empire's shrinking still. They have high unemployment. They have the economy is stagnating. Margaret Thatcher is the prime minister, and she's having a hard time holding on to power, because she's saying, a vote for me is a vote for the change, making things better, and things are not getting better. And it's the same thing in Argentina. They're having high inflation, they're having high unemployment, and the military actually takes over, and they're trying to show their strength. So you have these two opposing sides who are really looking for something to kind of galvanize the people, looking for something to kind of gain support both ways. And the Argentinians, particularly their military, says, all right, we're going to go and we're finally going to take the Falkland Islands. These are our islands. Because in 1982, it was the most recent time at that period when they had a vote, and the 1,800 people decided, no, we're going to stay members of the British Empire. We don't want to become part of Argentina. And that's when Argentina's all right, we're taking it. And they already had some troops there.
Yeah, it's early 1982, absolutely. And Argentina is under the control of a military leader, Lieutenant Leopoldo Galerti, I would say.
Galerti, yeah.
He winds up planning this invasion, as you mentioned, mainly because he and his military regime is being heavily criticized for economic mismanagement and also human rights abuses, to kind of be a little bit more specific there. But he believed that a recovery of this island would unite all the Argentine people behind the government in like this patriotic fervor. Like, okay, so every economy's bad, everything's bad, but like, we're Argentinians. So he started training this elite invasion force in secrecy, actually, in like in late 1981, early 1982, planning this attack. But actually, what happens is he's kind of forced into it on March 19th, 1982, when there's a dispute that erupts on a British controlled South Georgia island. It is one of the Falkland Islands, where Argentine salvage workers wind up kind of rebelling against
Rebellion, yeah.
their bosses, right? And they raised this big Argentine flag
That was a big thing,
on.
yeah. When they
That
raised
was
the
a big thing.
flag, yeah, that's causing all the outcry thing. And then they send the Argentine army and they take over the small British fort there.
But what's interesting is
Yeah.
like they were ready to invade, but then they're forced to do it because of this like little uprising of workers. Because the fact that his flag goes up, this becomes like national news and international news. England's like, wait, what is that? Send a British ship there. What's going on? Like, is there an uprising? And that's when you have Galerti's like, all right, let's do it. Let's just hit them with what we've been planning. So
Yeah.
the Argentine troops invade the Falklands on April 2nd. And as you mentioned, right, they quickly overcome the small garrison of British Marines at capital, which is Stanley. And
It's the only town also on that island.
yeah, on the island.
We'll get to, yeah. And another thing to make people know, like we said, there's only 1,800 British people that live on these islands. There are over 500,000 sheep. That's what everyone does there. If you live in the Falkland Islands, you are a sheep herder. That's it. That's your job. That's what you do. So that's why the British were never really that into this. And that's why the Argentinians didn't think the British were going to fight for it. It's 8,000 miles away. There's no way they're going to send forces over here and have them die for. They're like, more people are going to die than what's actually on the islands. That's what they're thinking.
So did you notice that initially when the Argentinians attacked, they had an order. Argentinian soldiers had an order not to inflict any British casualties, which I thought was really kind of neat because I mean they're attacking and taking over or trying to take over these islands, but they're told do not inflict any casualties on the locals or British citizens.
Well, I guess the idea behind that was basically like, why give the British a reason? Like, if we start killing British soldiers, they might actually come. You know what I mean? They might send their forces.
Yeah.
They're going to want revenge. They don't want to give them any provocation, any cause to keep it up.
So by April, within a month, Argentina winds up stationing more than 10,000 troops on the Falkland Islands, and the majority of these troops were poorly trained conscripts. Right, they were not supplied with really proper food, clothing, or shelter, or anything else for the approaching winter. But the premise was to just get a foothold in the Falklands. So 10,000 troops within a month. It kind of had the effect, initially at least, that they expected. The Argentine population reacted very favorably, right? So you have large crowds gathered at Plaza de Mayo, which is the presidential palace, demonstrated support for the military initiative. It's kind of working initially, but British government under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is like, no, right? And she basically declares war zone for 200 miles around the Falklands and assembles, which is kind of hastily, I would say hastily assembles a naval task force that was built around two main aircraft carriers. One was a 30-year-old HMS Hermes, and the other one, which I think it was HMS Invincible. It was a light carrier, much newer, but essentially that's the main force. Everything around it is kind of just built around these two aircraft carriers, and boom, they send it in to see what happens. There's a really famous Newsweek cover. I'm sure you saw this because, I mean, for us, we love Star Wars, but a very famous Newsweek cover that shows a picture of one of the British aircraft sailing to Falkland Islands, and the main on the cover, the title of the article is "The Empire Strikes Back." It's kind of cool.
Well, because this
it's
is
not
like
cool. We're talking about war, but yeah.
Well, no, I know what you're saying. Well, it's the last remnants of the British Empire, and Thatcher talks about that, and she says we have to recover those islands. We have to recover them for the people on them are British, and we still owe allegiance to the crown and want to be British. So, like, she's making this a big deal, and it becomes very popular in Britain. This war.
All right, so if you look at the actual conflict itself, April 25th, the British task force is ready, and it's basically steaming towards Argentina, right, in the war zone. But a smaller British force takes the South Georgia island back and captures one of Argentina's vintage U.S.-made diesel-electric submarines. And this kind of is an ongoing thing that keeps on popping up here, is that Argentina actually has a lot of old military stuff. They're not really up to date as much as the British are with, their tools of war, you might say. However, this is also a compliment to how well they do, considering. their old technology.
Yeah, you can make the argument, but you can also show what they say this kind of show the superior technology does win because really a lot of people, even in the United States, the military experts were saying there's no way that Britain is going to be able to recapture these islands. They're just too well defended and things like that. But it just shows that technological superiority that the British have over the Argentinians with their weapons and such that they are able to win. Most historians still say Argentina should have won this conflict if they would have like
Yep.
waited out a little longer.
I did see that. I did see what you just mentioned. The idea that the British analysis was, I mean, the American analysis was, yeah, these guys are not going to win. Like
No,
England
we said,
cannot
listen, we're
win
going to
this
help
war.
you. We're going to help you
Yeah,
as much as we can. We gave them a lot. We were even getting ready to give them one of our aircraft carriers. If they're like one of our old aircraft carriers, if one of theirs
yeah.
got sunk, we were going to like give them one. So it was like we were there, like we were helping them out, but we're like, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to do this. Like it's not going to be
Well,
easy.
this is, I mean, it's also Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. I mean, the
Yeah,
faces of conservatism in 1980. So they're definitely going to help each other out. The aircraft carrier you're talking about, which again never happened, we never had to give it to them. I started looking into this because like when you start googling things and you start
yeah,
click on one thing another, but it was actually an
rabbit
Iwo Jima
holes.
class amphibious assault ship, and those are it was known as the USS Guam. This one was readied to be lent over to Britain, but this is a interesting aircraft carrier because it's designed specifically for helicopters, um,
Yeah,
and
that was
not
supposed to help with the
for
invasion.
jets.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is really cool. So the British have the Sea Harrier planes, which at the time were one of the first planes ever to be able to take off like a helicopter and then turn into an actual jet fighter. So they asked for these helicopter based aircraft carriers so they could put their Harriers on them, which I thought was kind of cool, but never really had to happen. And the United States initially felt that Thatcher was a little too quick to send this force in. They believe that, especially the United States Congress, believed that Thatcher could have used some diplomatic options that she had, but she chose to strike back right away as opposed to diplomacy. And there was a fear by the US that this conflict could somehow draw the Soviet Union on Argentina's
yeah,
side. But again, this is 1982. Soviet Union's like out of money because of their own war that they're literally waging. And at the end of the day, United States send delegation to Argentina as saying that they could be the go-between for peace talks. Argentina's like, no, like
they're
get
like,
out
no,
of
thank
here.
you. So after that, the
Yep.
U.S. was like, all right, fine, forget it. Like, let's go. Yeah.
Sorry.
Then we
Yeah.
started just giving them satellite image with them, use our satellites. We were giving them weather reports of the
Yep.
area and everything like that, like logistics. Like, all right, well,
You don't want our
but the
help?
Argentinians like,
Here you
no,
go.
because
We'll help the other
this
guy.
was again, it's the Argentinian military that's in power. You have to understand that too. So they're
Yep.
obviously not. They're
Yep.
going to assume they're going to win this no matter what. So, like you said, yeah, the battle's going on, and I guess early on is probably the most controversial event of this war takes place. Right?
It's the
That go
sinking
ahead.
of the Argentine cruiser. So May 2nd, basically it's an old, obsolete Argentine cruiser purchased from the U.S. after World War II. It's an old World War II cruiser that is, being used in 1982. It was the General Belgrano was the name of this cruiser, and it was sunk outside the war zone, which is it's so interesting because this is such a like neat war. You know what I mean? They're like, all
Yeah, you
right,
only
there's going to be a
you only
war
fight
zone.
here. It's like a wrestling ring. You don't fight outside.
Literally.
It's not a no holds barred
And
match. You're keeping it in between the ropes. But this ship was not in the war zone.
yeah, and that's what makes it controversial because also most of the deaths that the Argentinians suffered during this were because of this particular sinking of the ship.
Yeah,
About
it was over
300,
300. Yeah,
yep, over 300 deaths total, which is half, more or less, almost half of all of the casualties that Argentina suffers during this particular conflict. And the idea was that it was unfair because it happened outside the designed war zone lines, which I can't get over that. It's like a neat. Let's be nice about this. Starting with even the whole idea of the Argentinian forces, like we're not going to kill British people. Like it's an interesting war to say the least. Then you had the since we're already on that topic, you had the Red Cross box. Did you see that? That before the
I didn't see
British
that one.
offensive operations began, the British and Argentine governments agreed to like establish an
Oh yes,
area
yeah.
on the high seas, right, where they could station their hospital ships. So they literally created this like box, imaginary box in the ocean, and said, "All right, there's like 20 miles diameter. It's like a circle, and it referred to officially as the Red Cross box. It was about 45 miles off of Falkland Islands, and basically." The British stationed their ships, and Argentinians stationed their ships, and it was like a hospital area, Red Cross box. So, like, again, this is so different from when we study World War I, World War II. Like, this is so almost like a civilized war in a sense. Following this controversial event of the sinking of General Belgrano cruiser, Argentine ships kind of were mostly kept in port, which changes the whole
Yeah. Changes the whole
military
war. It changes the
war
conflict. Yeah. So their
period.
navy's pretty much not there, right? The only thing
Yep,
their navy's doing, I think, was just I saw was they were just using naval aircraft to basically attack, and they had a couple diesel powered submarines that they did, which still
yep,
caused quite a bit of damage on the British fleet. The British lose a good number of ships during this time, but the main thing is here is the Air Force, like we talked about. This is an older Air Force. They're using conventional bombs, but what also because of what it is they're right at the edge of their combat like radius, so they can only do one pass at the British fleet. And if the British
yep,
fleet and they can only do it if the British fleet was actively trying to engage the Falkland Islands at all. If they just
yep.
backed up a couple of miles, they were out of the Argentinian position. They couldn't attack
Range.
them at all.
Yeah, they're out of range.
Yeah, they were out of their
Yeah.
range. They did. I read they did get some French made aircraft towards the end, and some
They did like
they're called the Exocet.
supersonic, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, they got some anti ship missiles. Only a handful. They didn't get a lot, but they were like really deadly. And again, that's kind of proven. And again, if you're following what's going on in the war in Ukraine now, these anti ship missiles, you can have these giant ships. They get hit with a couple of these anti ship missiles, and that's it. It's done. And they're designed to take out these ships, and there's just no way really getting around them unless the ships have enough anti-aircraft surrounding them and stuff like that. But yeah, so
Yep.
the Argentinians were doing they were fighting with less technology, but they were doing a pretty good job at keeping the British at bay. They really handicapped by the technology that they had just wasn't up to par with what their opponents had.
Yep. And also, I mean, this became after the sinking of that battleship. This became an air war.
Yeah,
Air
both sides
cover
realized
and
that they're
just
not getting that.
both sides. Yeah. And especially since, I mean, England's really there with their two main aircraft carriers, so they're kind of limited as well with regards to long range air cover. I mean, they have is what at this point, right? What their air superiority, or rather lack thereof. This is always often pointed out in this war that this proved to England that they do not have air superiority. They have an awesome navy, but when it comes to air, ground to air to air, they were severely lacking. Like as we mentioned, these old jets that are probably 30 years old are sinking British ships. I mean, Britain lost quite a few ships on here that were sunk through air to ground missiles, basically old school, like dropping bombs. This is like World War II tactics, but it's
Yeah,
1982.
yeah. These aren't
So
laser
you have the
guided or anything
Argentinian.
like that. Yeah,
No, nothing. Yeah, they would just fly over and drop a bomb on these British destroyers. And that's kind of how on May 4th, Argentina sank the destroyer HMS Sheffield, right? It also said in here that it's lost about 30% of all their planes. Again, showing to the world that they did
it's
not
a
have
huge
this air
number.
superiority. So
Yeah,
while this is happening in the air and the Argentinians are doing their thing, what the Argentinians cannot do or prevent is the British making an amphibious landing on the island. So, and that's exactly what happened. So, the Argentinian forces decide that they're basically going to station themselves at the capital. Stanley being a capital had one of the main airstrips, and they wanted to protect the airstrip. And then the British Navy winds up having this amphibious assault on the Falkland Islands. They basically take over and start racing towards Stanley. And eventually, what happens, they drop a bomb on the main Stanley airstrip, kind of stopping the air superiority of the Argentinians because it forced the Argentinians to then fly out of Argentina proper to fight the British and not
yeah.
be
Like
able
we
to
said
use the Falkland
before,
Islands.
their ships couldn't keep on doing that.
So it really limited them. So basically what happens here, this is kind of like beginning of the end at this point, because the only Argentine force is stationed in the capital, and what the British do is they basically surround the capital.
The British
Yep.
land. They land
Mhm.
unopposed, right, on May 21st. There are some Argentine defenders there. About 5,000, we were saying before. They were strong. Had a very effective resistance, and there was a lot of heavy fighting. And while this is going on, the Argentine Air Force is still bombing a lot of the British fleet. They sink a couple freighters, some destroyers, container ships, but they never damage the aircraft carriers, and they never sink enough ships to jeopardize the British
Mhm.
landing operation, like resupply and stuff like that. But at the same time, they keep on losing jets. They keep on losing their helicopters and their ground attack planes.
Yep.
So you just can't really keep it up. And then from the beachhead, basically, the British infantry is able to constantly advance more and more. It's hard fighting. A lot of it's actually hand to hand combat against these really dug in Argentinian troops. but the British succeeded in taking occupying the high ground west of Stanley. And then from there, they're able to basically to bombard and blockade the capital and the main port. And then the Argentinian garrison got cut off, and then they were basically starved out. And then the Argentinian commander Menendez surrendered on June 14th, which essentially ended the conflict. They still had small garrisons. The British still have to remove the small Argentinian garrison on Sandwich Island. It's about 500 miles
Hmm.
southeast on June 20th, but it was pretty much over after that. And again, this is very, very popular. There's like an image of a that one of the press took of the British soldiers marching in, and they have like the British flag tied up to his radio antenna, and that's like sent back to England. Everyone's like, "Oh, this is all," you know. So it makes a huge nationalistic pride in England right after this.
And overall, the British actually wound up capturing about 11,000 Argentine prisoners during this
Yeah,
war, and they were all released quickly thereafter. It's like, all right, we had this war, and like it's over now. So they released the prisoners, and Argentina announced
yeah.
that about 650 lives or so were lost. Like we mentioned before, half of them were because of the sinking of the General Belgrano. Britain lost about half of that, a little less. 255 official lives had been lost. Generally speaking, most of this South American countries, except Chile, supported Argentina. The United States, France, New Zealand, Australia, your typical who you would think would support Britain did support Britain throughout this conflict. Generally speaking, as you mentioned, the aftermath, Margaret Thatcher popularity
Oh,
increases
she
significantly.
becomes Margaret Thatcher. Like, like
Yep.
that's it.
She her conservative government and party was actually trailing in the opinion polls months before the conflict, and then she winds up winning re-election by a wide margin. As for the islanders and actual Falkland Islands, the islanders are given full British citizenship in 1983, which also improved the relations between them and England. And there is also a lot of economic help that is being now directed towards Falkland Islands to make life for these people better. In 85, there's a new constitution that was enacted promoting self government for the islanders, which is something that is continuously being discussed to this day, even though Argentina kind of claims today that Falkland Islands belong to them, and the
Yeah,
British
they're
say that it
still
belongs
there.
to
Yeah.
them, and nothing's really happening. Since then, it's called Fortress Falklands, and the British government basically decided to create a long term policy of providing the island with an actual military garrison. They realized that when the initial invasion happened in 82, it was very quick for the Argentinians to take over the islands because there just wasn't a viable military garrison stationed there. So from that point forward, you have permanent military complex, there just in case. What else you got?
Then what happened to what happened to Argentina after this? Right, is
I know,
basically
you
their
tell me.
military
Go.
government was discredited. You had it was discredited. Like this in the military, it's a military government, and they just failed this war. They were kind of like discredited. There was like people calling for their ouster. And it's basically what happened because they failed to prepare and support its own forces in this invasion that it basically ordered, and it failed. So the civilians basically rise up, and civilian rule was restored in 1983. And like you said, they still say though, listen, I find Britain won, but that they still believe the Falkland Islands should be these are theirs, which again is weird because there's not. I don't. I mean, I guess strategically it's important, but I've been reading about it. Like there's just like I said, there's 500,000 sheep on the island. There's a whole bunch of it's the largest place where albatrosses go. Like these are the things that are there. Like and yet you have these two countries like constantly fighting for it. There's no
Yeah.
shops whatsoever. I
Um,
saw there's 7 bars on the entire island. I mean, it's a nice island. Is that there's still so many landmines on the island? I think they only recently just dug up some of the last landmines because Argentina was putting so many landmines on the island when the British were coming to get ready for their invasion. There's actually signs that say "slow down,
crazy.
minefield," so you don't like accidentally step on a mine.
So this happens a few years later, but we talk about cultural impact to this. And for those of us out there that do like to watch football, as in like football and or soccer, I'm sure you saw this too. 1986 FIFA World Cup, which is eventually won by Argentina, led by one of Argentina's greatest soccer players, Diego Maradona. But you know how like we have our Miracle on Ice game? When you talk about
Mm-hmm.
like a cultural, historic sporting event, for us it would be us versus the Soviets in a Miracle on Ice. When it comes to Argentina, they have their own version of a super historically significant sporting event, and that is the quarterfinal of the FIFA World Cup, Argentina versus England, played on June 22nd, 1986. and it's played in Mexico City because the World Cup was in Mexico City. It's only 4 years after the Falkland Islands War, and Argentina and the United Kingdom are just not friends at all. And England also prides itself to be the origin nation of soccer, as we would call it here in the States. But basically what happens is Diego Maradona winds up scoring two very infamous goals during this time. In the 51st minute, this is known as the Hand of God goal. Maradona scored by basically, it looks like a header, but he actually uses his hand, and the referee didn't see it, but cameras caught it. And then he kind of puts them up, and then 4 minutes later is the most famous dribble where Diego Maradona dribbles past 5 England players. Like they're shocked that that they just got scored against. He dribbles basically through the entire field and winds up scoring the goal of the century, as becomes known. And Argentina wins the game 2-1, and they wind up go on to win the 1986 World Cup, which was supposedly, at least in the sporting world, this was like a battle victory. They eventually won the World Cup by beating England. Kind of very similar to like our Miracle on Ice, which probably we should do a podcast on because it's like kind of a big deal.
Well, no, I mean, I think, like you said, this war basically, if you look at it, England wins and they got this national pride and everything like that. Thatcher becomes the Thatcher that we know in history, right? And then Argentina is kind of like left in the dust, right? That their government, who also started this war for nationalistic reasons, loses, right? And then that government is ousted. And then yet the conflict is still kind of there as far as that both sides the British still say, no, it's our territory. And the Argentinians say, well, not really. But again, it's sheep. Like they're seeing who gets to herd sheep there. But okay, whatever. I get it.
Anyway, so I think that kind of concludes our Falkland Islands War podcast episode. I mean, I had fun researching this, and it was fun talking about it. So for all those of you guys that do tune in every week, thank you so much. We really do appreciate you tuning in. And if you do listen to us, please do give us a review wherever you are listening to this and click the subscribe button. It does help us out. So if you ever need to reach us, you can reach us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. We are here to answer any of your questions, and we are very open to suggestions about any topics you may want us to do. I guess that's it. Have a nice week, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.